Welcome to Connected Through Christ, a podcast where faith meets real life. Your host, Jeremy Johnson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Connecting Through Christ. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, we have a very special guest, Miss Melissa Croden. Melissa's going to share her testimony with us and give you a quick glimpse into her life. Melissa, welcome to Connecting Through Christ.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. I'm glad to have you. You were actually highly recommended from Haley, so that was a good thing. So tell the audience, who was Melissa, maybe when you were younger and before God?
So my childhood, we'll start around there. I feel like I grew up relatively normal, had mom, dad present in my life. I wasn't really involved in any sort of religion or practicing religion, Catholic or Christian. So that wasn't really something in, the realm of my upbringing. But yeah, I grew up in Alberta, Canada, normal kid, pretty energetic, always climbing trees, like constantly. Wasn't ever really involved in any regular sports either. I just kind of like dabbled in everything here and there. My mom put us in like all sorts of sports, but we never consistently stuck with something, and we being my sister and I.
Okay.
And yeah, so I went through the public school system, graduated high school, ended up going to post-secondary for emergency medical services. Got my license doing that, and then there was a hiring freeze after I graduated, and needed to fill my time doing something. So I had a friend that was preparing for a kickboxing fight, and she had invited me to the gym, and I started training from there, and here I am. I feel like a lot of my MMA training has led me deeper into my spirituality. Like growing up, I always knew that I wanted to do something that contributed to society, like on a deeper level with some meaning behind it. And so helping others is always something that's been naturally a value of mine. And then that accompanied by like another natural characteristic of mine of having an interest in like morbid realities in life kind of led me into choosing EMS as my career in a way, if that makes sense.
It does.
And yeah, so I think a lot of those things kind of led me down the path of the Christic and spirituality. So yeah.
Let me ask you this. When you said, you liked helping people and stuff, I know obviously as a medic, you're helping people sometimes in very critical scenarios and some pretty rough situations, very stressful situations. Was that part of the reason also why you decided to become a medic was because of that part of you?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. A lot of it has to do with my mom, because growing up, she was diagnosed with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and at that time, they didn't have the stem cell therapy that they have now to manage that type of cancer. So basically, when they had caught the cancer at stage 4, the doctors were basically like, you have almost no chance of survival. So they started preparing my sister and I to like move back to Ontario to live with other family members. Like all of that was kind of rolling. And one day, I guess one of the specialists approached my mom in the hospital and was like, look, we have this type of treatment that could possibly work for. We think you're a great candidate, as solely based off of your attitude, because she had like such a great attitude towards like facing the reality of death, basically. So they went through the treatment. I don't know if you know a ton about stem cell treatment, but you basically become like your own blood donor. So what they do is they take your bone marrow and use that to transfuse the blood mixed with the chemotherapy to treat the cancer. Because with non-Hodgkin's, it's in your lymphatic system, which is like you have anatomy and physiology. So, it's like a spider web, like it's everywhere if it's in
Yeah.
there. You can't just cut it out, basically, like a mass of cancer cells.
Right.
So they went through with that treatment, and long story short, she kicked cancer and survived a pretty harsh form of cancer. So after that, it kind of inspired me to get into the medical field and to help people. Yeah, so it was a really intense thing to like experience more in hindsight, because when it's happening, you don't really fully understand, especially at a young age, what it is that's happening. Because I was really young when it happened.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, it was like it definitely pushed me towards wanting to help others in a way that I can, in a way that like suits my personality in a way, because EMS is a very like stressful like kind of environment. You never know what you're walking into, and I think like I am very good at dealing with that kind of lifestyle. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it takes a different person to deal, to walk into those types of job scenarios because it is an extremely high stress environment. It's not for
Hmm.
everybody.
Hmm.
And then, and I know in addition to that, aside from the stress, the things that you see, that can be a whole nother thing that's a stress for some people to deal with, because you
Hmm.
can see some pretty intense things, anatomically speaking. You'll see things that other people aren't used to seeing. If you see somebody that got shot or was split open or had
Yeah.
a horrible head-on collision, things that
Hmm.
are just not common for most people to look at.
Hmm. The thing about that though is, of course, we know what we signed up for. Like, that you're gonna have to manage situations like that and seeing things like that. But lately, as I mature, spiritually and as a Christian, is you look at it more as a lot of opportunities to uh, implement things like prayer and showing that you can care about people in different ways, not just like, I have my monitor, I have my primary bag, like I can fix you or help you get you to the hospital, in this amount of time. Like, yes, that's part of it, but there's other opportunities in like uh more simple things like holding someone's hand that has gone through or is sick or injured or ill or not having a great day, like some people call when they don't necessarily need to be transported. But
Right.
you can either like look at it like, oh, they called 911, they didn't need us, and you can be kind of begrudging about it, or you can kind of look past that and be like, look, maybe this person is lonely, like they want to talk to somebody, or you know they need something, not necessarily medical, but of something from your heart. So
Yeah.
I've been seeing those opportunities arise a lot more because I think I have like the eyes for it now a little bit more. Like it's growing and I see flashes of it, but I definitely see those opportunities a lot, and it's quite an adventure.
That's powerful. Let me ask you this, as far as because I'm not familiar, like companies you work for or whatever, are they okay? Like if you were to pray for somebody while you're on the job?
um I recently, like, because in America, like for example, Texas especially, a lot of Christians there. So if I were to do it somewhere like that, I don't think it would be that unusual. But um, I think I did weird out my one partner on the ambulance a little bit, praying for a patient that we had. But I was like, I was driving, my partner was attending, and we had a guy, we transported him because he had I can't remember what kind of cancer it was, but he was recently diagnosed with cancer. He was being transported to another facility to have that cancer treated. And as I'm driving there, I'm like, okay, I've kind of heard in a voice in my head saying, you have to pray for this man. And I
Wow.
was like, okay, so I'm like praying in my head, like on my own. It was like, no, you need to pray with him, for him. And I was like, oh man, like I feel so like almost embarrassed in this, but I'm like, if you say so, like if I must, I'll do it. And so before we got out of the ambulance, my partner's like getting ready to take like just take him off our monitor that, has his vitals and stuff. And I'm like, I have a weird question for you, to our patient. And he's like, sure. I'm like, do you mind if I pray for you really quick? And he was like, of course, I would love that. So I like
That's
held his
powerful.
hand and then like made made my partner wait, and I prayed for him really quickly, and then we dropped him off, and that was that. And I feel like it it takes kind of a weird a bit of courage to kind of
Absolutely.
stand up for what you believe in and actually have a voice for it and find the proper words in moments like that. So it's definitely an awkward process, but something that is kind of beautiful in a way to find that
Absolutely.
courage.
That's
Yeah.
powerful. And I got to tell you, um, there's many people that if given that same opportunity, probably just would not do it, for
Hmm.
many different reasons. Um, so to take the initiative and to stand firm on it is awesome. I mean,
Hmm.
that tells a lot about yourself and your character. I think that's powerful. It really is.
Hmm. I
So,
was more nervous doing that than walking into a code. Like
yeah,
more nervous doing that than like doing like more awful things in EMS that
yeah.
you have to deal with. It was kind of interesting because it's like seems so simple, but
It does, but it's like you said, when as a Christian, sometimes you can be put into a situation and it's like, we shouldn't worry about what other people think, or what they might say about us, because if
hmm.
you believe in something, like you said, you stand firm for it, even if you have to stand alone. And that's hard for some people to do. Um,
Hmm.
with people like yourself and myself that have that warrior mentality, or fighters, with it's a little bit easier because we have that type of personality, but it is very hard for people to make that decision and take that initiative,
Hmm.
but the reward for doing so, and it's a very powerful and, like you said, beautiful thing to do.
Hmm.
Very rewarding too.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And aside from that, it just if it feels like it is the right thing to do, and I always try to propel myself towards doing the right thing. So if it's the right thing, like, you have to do it even if you don't want to. It's like training, like conditioning. Like
Right.
it doesn't if you don't feel like doing it, like you don't always feel like doing it, but you have to because it's the right thing to do to prepare properly. So,
Absolutely. I tell people a lot, having a relationship with Christ is like going into any other relationship, right? If you find someone that you like and you're interested in, and you want to spend time with that person to get to know them and fall in love with them and so on and so forth. And it's like with God, you know, he wants that relationship with us, but a lot of people don't spend time in prayer or reading
mhm,
their Bible, all these other things that help you to know who he is, know about him, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, they'll spend so much time on social media and doing other
mhm,
things, when it takes discipline at first, but eventually the rewards come in from being obedient and so on and so forth. And you learn a lot about who God is through that process.
yeah, definitely. It does take a lot of discipline to spend time in contemplation, like real contemplation and communion with God. And sometimes I think a lot of what keeps people from doing that is maybe they don't feel as if they're doing it correctly, if that makes any sense.
Okay,
Like
yeah.
sometimes, like when I was learning how to pray, I actually learned how to pray in Texas at Haley's church because
Okay,
I was attending church with her family every Sunday,
interesting.
and then I started going to the prayer group before the service would start.
Okay.
And it was like a group of women that would hold hands in a circle, and we would take turns saying what was on our heart, praying out loud of like about whatever it is that kind of came to the surface. And it was a really powerful experience. And it taught me a lot. It taught me how to speak, like to speak out loud words of God, hoping that having faith in that these are the things that I should be saying.
Right.
So it definitely does take a lot of courage, discipline. Sometimes you even have to like study the word,
Absolutely.
it's got to become like incorporated into your life
Yes.
for it to flourish in a way that you're gonna, I guess, see it, which I think is, ultimately everyone's goal. They want to see a product of their labor in a way
Yeah.
is not yours, but God's in that
Sure.
case. But
Sure. Absolutely.
same thing.
So let me ask you, Melissa, when, you was going through working with the ambulance and stuff like that, what was it that got you to, I guess, to start pursuing God more? What was it? Was there a specific incident or a specific person or situation? What was it?
I could describe it as a very slow burn.
Okay.
Over the last number of years, specifically when I did start taking my training more seriously, my old coach, he is very like knowledgeable in theology. So he would always tell me stories of the Bible, like all the classic stories about um Jesus's life and what he did with the apostles and what those stories meant and kind of like translated them to me throughout the years. So like over time I started gaining like small amounts of
Knowledge.
theological
Yeah.
knowledge. Um and then it's almost as if like I had a revelation one day where it's counterintuitive. Like uh I noticed like that there's so much the evil is everywhere in the world. It's you have to be insanely naive to deny that it exists where we
Right.
live. Like we were born into a world where horrible things happen all the time, right?
Right.
Um, and so if you acknowledge that one thing exists, its opposite has to. So the evidence of like the demonic, for example, is just as much evidence of God existing. It was really simple. It's a really simple math equation. Like, and just from there, it was like, oh, okay, I believe this. This is a story that you can't deny now. And like Jesus' life and his words are something that if you live by, you know God more. So it was more like leading up to that revelation was more complicated because I had to live life. And then the revelation itself was quite simple, very
Right.
simple to see. Like it's hard
Yeah.
to deny, but you have to like really have met some demons to understand it.
Sure. So
So
when you say a slow burn, are you talking weeks, years? What are we going through here timeline wise?
I would say years.
Years.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's been
All right.
years, like having a subtle interest in it, but never really taking it seriously in a way.
So
Um,
I have to ask you too, going to Haley and his church. So how was that? You said you learned some things. Tell me about that experience.
it was awesome. It's a small church, so I kind of like smaller communities anyways. And she's in a band, in a church band with
What?
her nan and her mom, her dad, like her cousin is the drummer. The first time I saw them play music together, I was like, so beautiful. I was crying like a dork in the chair.
And for the
And
audience, tell them where was this located? Where were you at this point? Where was this?
that was like in the Waco area in
Texas,
Texas.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Technically in an area called Robinson,
Hmm.
but like in the Waco area.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I saw them play and it was really, really nice to see like a family so close, and so bonded
Yes.
by their belief and their faith. Her dad is an amazing speaker. Like he tells really good, like personal stories that are relatable, which I really like when people that are preaching tell stories about themselves that you can relate to the human experience or find something in. And he's just like really passionate about his family, that you can like feel the love in his stories. And then he gets to the point about like why it is that he's saying these things. So it's good.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why I'm kind of doing this too, because, we all have a story. We
Mhm.
all have a different testimony that I know, like we spoke about before, yours is unique, yours is different from mine. You can capture an audience that I can't, and vice versa. And so it's good to have an array of people that have different testimonies that people can latch on to different aspects of it and grow
Mhm.
from it and learn from it too.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. It's like a mustard seed, right?
Yeah,
The kingdom is a mustard seed that a woman took and planted in her garden. And it grew and grew until the birds made nests on his branches. That's like one of my favorites.
I know. I need to get back with Haley too. It just reminded me. She had mentioned something about a dad. I need to try and get him on here one
Oh
day.
my gosh, you 100% should.
Yeah.
Derek is the best. Yeah, you'll love him.
So, how long did you stay going to that church for? How long were you in the area?
Um, so I was there for pretty much a year. Because I was getting my athletic visa. And so when you apply for your visa and you're across the border, you can't cross back over. So I was kind of landlocked in the States. But yeah, I would go every Sunday. I spent Christmas with their family
Um,
and New Year's with all of them and lived with Haley the whole time and got to know that family pretty well. And they're like the best people I know.
awesome.
Yeah.
And she did have a powerful story about when you do things right, the things that come about from that, from living that way. Because some people go through a dark, depressed state. They go into this evil lifestyle sometimes before they see the light, all these things.
Right.
But for her, it's like she grew up, you know, in
Hmm.
that godly type of house and environment and did things the right way and was taught the message and lived the
Hmm.
message. And,
Yep. Yep.
she's
100%.
that story and it's very powerful. She's like, oh, my story's boring. I'm like, no, it's awesome.
It's
You know?
boring. Well, the thing is about her family, I've never seen a family more attacked than by like by the demonic than they have.
Uh,
They have been attacked spiritually nonstop for the year that I lived there.
yeah.
I was like, what is happening? From like big events to little like things that would go wrong in their house. And I was just like, demons, it's
Uh,
demons. It was
yeah.
just constant. And like they uh they never waver ever.
That's
So
awesome. That's
yeah,
powerful.
it's really powerful to see. So any complaint that I can think of, I'm like, it's okay, like just be like the Cowens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so in your relationship, what is God? I know you've obviously grown, it was a slow start for you, or it took time, but you had your revelation. And since that time, how have you grown? What has God done for you? What's what's some things that you've learned?
Um, well, I guess he's done everything for me. And it's more so like a continual learning. I've learned to learn in a way, like stay humble and understand that like anything, it takes continual effort to kind of stave away from sinning because you're gonna do it, but you need guidance and help from God to stave from it. Like from like you mentioned, people getting lost in social media, like that's 100% sin because it's like to sin is to miss the mark in translation. It's to be disconnected and separated from God. So when you're constantly like aiming your arrows all over the place and not even paying attention to where you're aiming towards, like that's sinning. So it's like even if you miss, like you still aim. So learning how to like watch myself in those moments, I think is kind of what I've learned to do. So recognize like where I am as far as like my my I guess spiritual growth is. It can get stunted very easily by I guess using that same example with social media or like endless scrolling. That kind of stuff is like it's basically the darkness stealing that energy that's supposed to go towards God. And I can feel it too. And like you can watch yourself do it, but it's almost like you can't stop. I'm sure it's like anyone that's had some sort of addiction or something. I bet you they hate what they're doing. I bet you anything. You talk to any addict, no addict wants to be an addict. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like when you're watching yourself like be lazy mentally, it's hard to like pick yourself up out of it. So you can't really do it yourself in a way. So I've learned to like trust in my faith to do that for me, if that makes any sense whatsoever. I'm sure
Oh,
you
absolutely.
understand what I'm saying.
No, absolutely. I mean, I feel
Yeah.
like when it comes to the social media thing, I think it's just because it's so normal today. I mean, pick up, it's unfortunate, but you see a family eating dinner at a restaurant, but everybody's like this,
Yeah.
you know, and there's no engagement with everyone at the table. Everyone's on their
Hmm.
phone. And it saddens me when I see it because I'm like, pay attention to the people that's in front of you. Our time is limited, it's
Hmm.
like, and I don't know what they're looking at, but at the end of the day, when we put anything before God, you
Right.
whether it's a relationship, for one time it was MMA for me, it replaces God, and He's a jealous God, and He wants to be first, you
Right.
know, and so anything we put before Him is basically idolatry. And when it comes time to spending time with Him, a lot of people will give you the excuse, I just don't have time. But if they really,
Nonsense.
yeah, if they really break down the time that they spend on social media and this, you know, they have time. And I think
Yeah.
social media is just a big part of it, but there's so many other things, playing games, just whatever. It could be anything, but I think social media is a big part of it. And I mean, look, I do get on social media. I usually do it first thing in the morning.
Hmm.
I do pray first and all of this, but I might make a post for the day and I might randomly get on to check stuff on that
Hmm.
post. And that's it. I don't really do a ton of scrolling. I don't.
Yeah.
Because at one point, guess what? I was this guy,
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
and I,
It's crazy how addicting it is.
yeah, and I told God, like, I knew I needed to spend more time with him. I needed to get back in the word. I needed to invest in prayer and invest in him so that I could get so much closer to him.
Yeah.
And and listen, the rewards for doing so, God has opened so many doors since I fully committed and put him first.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely evidence for when you spend time in prayer and contemplation. I have a few stories myself. They often involve animals, oddly enough. Like I've had a few incidences where I'll use uh, a story for example. So, um, there was a day where I was feeling a little bit disconnected and was like, I need to go pray. I need to go sit in contemplation and listen, empty myself and listen. Like the goal was to empty myself so that I could have space for, you know, God's word. So I went and sat by one of my favorite spots by a river on a big rock. It's really beautiful scenery, lots of beautiful trees and rocks, and one of my favorite spots to sit. So I sat there for about an hour in prayer and was saying to myself, like, I'm not my body, I'm not my mind, I'm not like all these labels. Like I would go through each one as they come, like I'm not a fighter, I'm not this. So you're like emptying yourself of, you know, yourself, if that makes
Right.
sense. And then the next day, I was driving to the city to go to sparring for training. And I was driving. with my coach and a few of the other people I train with. And we were on the highway, and all of a sudden I'm like, what is that? I saw something on in the middle of the road on the highway. And I was like, it's a cat. So my coach who was driving like swerved last minute around this cat. And I was like, you have to pull over. So he pulled over, and I like jumped out of the car. And this is like a main highway, like trucks whizzing past us. And I'm like running down the highway like a crazy person. And there's this giant red truck coming towards us. And I'm waving my hands, like going, stop, like trying to mouth the word stop so they can see. They
Right.
completely ignored me because the cat was still on the road.
Oh,
And it drove past the cat, like I swear, an inch past his head,
ugh.
like whizzed right past it. And then the cat like dashed off into the ditch, and I followed it. And then I saw him and grabbed him
Mhm.
and picked him up and brought him back into the car. He had like, it looked like he was in decent condition, but he had like a bloody nose. His eye was like all swollen and bleeding, and like there was like some scratches on his back. So it looked like he was attacked by
Right.
another animal or something. So I skip sparring. I'm like, I'm not sparring. I'm taking care of this cat. So I like go to the vet, take the cat in. They check him out. Tell me that he looks fine, gave me some meds for him, and they were like, so usually what we do is we'll take strays and put them into the like adoption system,
Yeah.
and they'll be adopted from there. And I was like, my mom's been looking for a cat. She had been looking for a cat to adopt for like 3 months, 3 months before this incident happened. I was like, my mom wants a cat. Let me call her. And the cat doesn't have to go. You don't have to do all the paperwork. I'll just pay for the vet bills, and we'll take him and he'll have a home. And so I call my mom. She's like, yeah, I want him. And then I kind of negotiated with the vet people because I guess their policy is normally you have to adopt through the system, like once an animal is put into the system, but they made an exception for me and walked out of there with that kitten and then brought it to my mom's house, and she has him to this day, and he's very spoiled.
Awesome.
But we found him at like 5 weeks. And he must have been like dumped out there. But the point is, anytime I've like actually made a very serious and meaningful connection through prayer and contemplation, things like that have happened. Like I've always been put into that situation where you have to make a decision like right then and there to potentially help or save a life. So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting. That's happened a few times with animals too.
Yeah.
So
So getting on your spiritual journey again, if you had if you had to give advice to someone who, may be questioning getting on that path, or struggling to get on that path, maybe because of addiction or some darkness in their life, what would be some advice that you could give to that person into helping them go into that right direction?
hmm. I feel like this is a question I struggle to answer because I still don't know my place in speaking, because like I said, I'm still kind of finding my voice in this path. But I would probably say, like, honestly, start by ask God yourself, like ask yourself and see what comes of it, and um educate yourself, like read the stories, read the Bible, and discern for yourself, you know, what it is that you believe to be true. I've had a few close friends like come to me for to answer questions, and I feel that I've been able to um do justice in the word and like say the proper things. So
Like
um
biblical questions of stories in the
yeah,
Bible?
like theological questions that I'm like,
Oh,
oh, I actually know this.
that's
I'm
awesome. I mean,
surprised.
that shows growth,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, like I've surprised myself in that. And then another piece of advice would just go go to a church. If you've never been to church, go to one. Like find one doesn't doesn't matter what denomination it is, just go to one and listen, sit and listen. So I think that's probably where I'd be at for if I had to give somebody advice and where to go.
Was that like whenever you first started? I know you said it took years, but what was the biggest thing that helped you think, on that path in the beginning?
Probably reading,
Studying.
and I I read a lot of Richard Rohr. He's a Franciscan monk. So a lot of his books kind of pointed me in the right direction. Um, I actually met him, which was pretty cool. He's from New Mexico, and I was training in New Mexico at Jackson Wink.
Really?
And I was like, oh, well, Richard Rohr, his church is here. I'm going to go see if he's doing a sermon. And he happened to be. So I took a cab from the dorms at Jackson and sat in church by myself just to listen to this man speak. And I got to shake his hand after. So that was a pretty cool experience. But yeah, Richard Rohr has a really interesting outlook that I can very much relate to as far as modern day church goes, because he is a very big, like he's a big part of the church himself, but his outlook on it is quite interesting because he can kind of see past a lot of in a lot of churches that exist that could really like turn people away from pursuing, a Christic path, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it's you know, today with church, and I'm not saying this as all churches, but church in this modern day, at least here in this country, has
Hmm.
become big business. It's become entertainment for some. Um, and it's some of those have become very deceptive in their
Yeah.
messages. They
Yeah.
sound very good, they
Hmm.
look very good, but the message coming out is not always truth. And that's
Hmm.
and the scary part about that is for some person sitting in the audience, if they truly don't know the word
Hmm.
or know God, it's hard for them to discern because it sounds good.
Hmm.
And that brings up the point too of the importance of knowing God's word and knowing Him and learning these things so that you don't get caught up in that type of church.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of
And
the
you
big
got to
churches
ask
can be
questions.
scary.
Yeah. I've heard some stories from Haley about churches like that. And I could see why it would like put a lot of people off from even going in the first place. So it's unfortunate that happens. But I mean, I feel like having a relationship with Jesus and with God is like a very deeply personal thing. Yet it's broad in the sense that everybody, not everybody, but there are a lot of people that do experience. So it's kind of like paradoxical in a way. So I think like incorporating going to a church and listening to sermons as a part of your I guess practice in being a spiritual person uh is good, but there's also a lot of work to be done. Like you have to pick up your own bus. Like a lot of people forget that. Like do as Jesus did. Pick up your own cross. Like some guy on Sunday is not going to do that for you. Just because you hear these words doesn't mean you're doing the work. And I think that's where a lot of it gets lost and misunderstood.
Yeah. No,
So
it definitely does. Um, God gives us direction, but sometimes we have to act on it. We have to do
yes.
we have to do our part. So,
Yeah,
um, so if you don't mind, let's shift gears for a moment, and
sure.
why don't you talk to the audience about maybe how you came into fighting and what might be next for you?
Um, so right now I'm coming off of a win in October. I fought for LFA um in Denver, Colorado. Ended up getting a second round TKO, bringing my record to 6 wins, 2 losses. All of my wins have been finishes. So after that fight, I spoke to my managers and I think we're kind of leaning towards waiting to see if the UFC will give me a short notice fight in the new year. So I'm just staying ready for anything at this point.
How long ago was your last fight?
That was October 25th.
Okay.
Yeah, October 25th. Yeah.
How long you been with Legacy?
I've been fighting with them for almost 2 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, almost 2 years now.
And what division you're in?
Bantamweight.
Yeah. All right.
Mhm.
Cool. So all finishes.
Yeah,
Pretty
pretty
awesome.
neat.
Yeah. Never leave it in the hands of the judges, right?
Never. I feel like any fight that goes to a decision, you've already lost.
It's well, in these days, I mean, I'm sure you've seen there's been so many, especially recently, in watching UFC for sure. There's been so many horrible decisions. Uh,
Right. What is
like
happening?
blatantly horrible. Like what? What
Yes.
what what fight were you watching, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
it's pretty wild. It's almost like fighters don't know what it is that the judges want to see or something. Like
yeah,
where am I how am I going to dominate? Like if I'm going to go to decision, how do I show you that what I'm doing is more dominant than the other, you know?
yeah. I
It's kind of
think
weird.
that there needs to be some better criteria set in order
Mhm.
to be a judge. Uh,
Yes.
you
They
know,
why aren't they hiring the retired fighters?
yeah, I really don't know. I know that like John McCarthy has a school where these guys and gals can go to become a referee and stuff.
Oh,
And I
cool.
think that there should be something similar to that for judging, you know. There should
Yeah.
be something, there should be some standard at least that they can be held accountable because as a fighter, you know, it's not just a win or loss that's in the hands of the judges. It's a
Mhm.
career, it's finances. There's so many things that can happen in their decisions that
Mhm.
they make on those fighters. And I think they don't weigh on it heavy enough. They just don't, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. There's definitely a lot of heavy backlash on them at the moment. But
Yeah. Well,
retired fighters, like they're gonna know the sport better than anyone.
no, I agree. Hopefully, out of this, something comes good of it. You know, maybe something out of the recent ones.
Yeah,
Um, something good will come out. I just hope so. Anyway. Uh,
yeah, for sure.
well, Melissa, I thank you so much for coming on the show. And it was a pleasure to have you. Pleasure to
Yeah,
hear your
thanks for
story.
having me.
Pleasure to hear your story. You did awesome. So,
Thanks.
um,
Thank you so much for having me. It was really cool to be able to talk about this stuff so openly and um yeah, I really appreciate that.
yeah, the platform is different. You know, when I first started doing this, I just felt like God opened the door. And I wasn't really obedient at first. I'm like, I'm not doing this. I didn't even know what a podcast was, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And it happened to be a pastor that asked me to go on his show because he was kind of interested in my background. And I'm like, I told him no at first because I'm like, I don't even know what a podcast is. I don't know what I'm committing to. So I went home, kind of talked to my wife, and she's like, oh, it's just this. You've heard podcasts before. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
So I ended up going on the podcast, and it was like from there, it caught so much. Um, I caught so many messages from it. So many people seem to have been affected by it that, you know, a couple people were like, you should do your own. And I'm like, no, definitely not for me. I don't have the time, full-time job, seminary, Bible, all this stuff, family.
A
But
lot going on.
I ended up, praying about it for a while, and my wife and I talked about it for a while, and things came together, and here we are. But I can tell you, it's been such a blessing because with each individual person, there's so many different people affected by that particular story, and it's very humbling uh, to see that, and I'm very thankful to be used by God to just have this platform, you know.
Yeah, I think you're doing all the right things. It seems like you're very good at this and good at interviewing. So, and you'll only get better.
Yeah, hopefully so.
Mhm.
And it's as I never intended for the platform to be fighter based. It just so happened to be, I guess, as an ex fighter and people knowing fighters, it just kind of, it took to them. And like it's been from one fighter to the next to the next. But like Haley, Miranda, a couple other people that have come on, it's like they said, it's so good to do something as far as for being interviewed and not just talk about just fighting.
Hmm.
Because like we spoke earlier, there's so much more to each one of you. You're not just a fighter, right? There's so much
Yeah,
more. And people need to see that, especially with fighters, because there's still a lot of people that have the wrong perception about fighters.
I
Um,
agree. Yeah.
and so they need to be able to see things like this to show how fighters truly are, what that
Hmm.
real person's all about. It's not just some person in the cage that's angry or,
Yeah.
looking to hurt somebody,
Oh my God. If I had a dime for every time someone's come up to me and like, oh, don't make her angry. I'm like, ha 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 ha.
Yeah,
It's like,
it's
what do
crazy.
you
And the perception is still somewhat in that way. It's not everybody, but you still have those out there, like, oh, that's barbaric. They can't believe they do that to one another.
don't get me started on that one. I'll give it to people when they say, "Oh, that's barbaric." I'm like, "This is barbaric." And the fact that you have freedom to go about your life while people are fighting wars for you constantly overseas isn't like you are partaking in that just as much as anybody else. So that's like my biggest response to
Uh,
that. Because you
yeah,
can't escape, like you can't escape, um, you know, the violence and like dark side of humanity. It just is. So
right. But
people think they're above it.
if people understood more of the sports side of it, the intelligence behind learning
Mhm.
jiu-jitsu or wrestling, the technique of it all,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
understand more of that side of it, that it's not just people that's angry going head to head. There's intelligent decisions being made in those fights. You
it's
know,
an art form in
yeah,
a way.
absolutely it is.
Mhm.
And so I've seen this, I've seen it change over the decades, and it is getting better, but it still has
Yeah,
a ways to go. So
definitely a long way to go. For sure. And I always tell people to add on to that, like, uh fighting is my art and I get to be the art, and I fight on a literal canvas. My medium just happens to be blood.
yeah, you know,
So
no, I get that. Believe me, I can
yeah,
relate.
yeah,
Haley actually said this best, and my wife caught it listening to our podcast. She said something to the fact of, talking about having a passion and a purpose.
yeah,
And, at one time I think I was telling her, mixed martial arts was my passion. It was my God, so to speak. Even though I didn't worship it, it was first in my life. Fighting was. Um, but, she had made the correlation. She's like, it was your passion before, but now this is your purpose. You know,
right.
and I think that was very powerful, and it really stuck with me. My wife and I went to some fights a couple weeks ago, and as soon as I got to the fights, we were cage side. One of the guys who is one of the owners of the show came up to me, and we know each other, and he said, "Would you be interested in doing the invocation and the opening prayer?" And I was so humbled and thankful that out of anybody in that whole arena or audience, or he came to me and asked, and I'm
Mhm.
like, I was able to step back in the cage, but for something completely different. That's my purpose.
That's
And
awesome.
it
I love that.
really, it really resonated that night when I got to go in because I was like, just the feeling from being back in that environment, it fires me up. You get those, I got one more fight in me. No, I don't. But you start getting those feelings and those emotions, and it's like, it's felt good to go in there and to do something for God.
I
And
love that.
God really has has a personality, and he has humor, and that night kind of showed me a different side because it was like he allowed me to step back in the cage, but for his purpose.
Right.
At the same time, my passion is still in there. So
Hmm.
it was awesome.
That's really cool. I love that connection you made there.
Yeah.
I like it.
You can think Haley, or I think her grandfather, or maybe her dad. One of them was the one who I think was originally used to tell that to her. I
Yeah.
just, I remember my wife picking it up, and then that night it really hit from that. I was like, wow, that's powerful. That's powerful.
Yeah.
So anyway, Melissa, thank you so much again for coming on. Thank you all for tuning in today. Stay tuned for more as we have some more upcoming guests that we're going to be announcing soon and very shortly. Please like, share, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. I'm struggling still to keep up with all these new platforms. But keep following us and stay tuned as we continue connecting through Christ.
Thanks for listening to Connecting Through Christ. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Stay blessed and keep growing in Christ. See you next time.